Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make an apple gingerbread cake, and this is what it looks like. On the bottom we have a really moist and flavorful cake. It has ground spices like cinnamon and ginger. We have some molasses. It's made with yogurt. And then we're going to top the cake with slices of apple. Perfect fall, winter dessert. So the first thing that you will need to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then you will need a 9-inch, 23 centimeter springform pan. Comes in 2 pieces. And then fit the plate, and there's a clamp there. Just clamp it down. Now you can butter the inside of your pan. You could oil it. Or I'm just going to spray it with one of these non-stick sprays. And then I like to line my pan with a piece of parchment paper. So what I do is I just kind of put it in, and then I flip it over so that there's a little bit of the oil on there so that the paper doesn't stick to the bottom of our cake. And there we go. So, really easy cake to make. We don't need our mixer. I mean, you could, but I don't bother. I just mix it by hand with one bowl wet, one bowl dry, mix them together, we're done. This is a yogurt cake. And we're going to start with the dry ingredients. So in a bowl, I have 1½ cups, 195 grams, all-purpose flour, plain flour. To that, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of baking powder, ½ teaspoon, 2 grams of baking soda, ½ teaspoon, 2 grams of, I'm using a kosher salt. You could use a table salt. If you use a table salt, I'd maybe add just 1/4 teaspoon. And then I'm adding 3/4 teaspoon of ground cinnamon and ½ teaspoon of ground ginger. If you want, you could add like 1/8 teaspoon of ground cloves or 1/4 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg if you want to do that for more flavor. And I'm also going to add the zest of 1 lemon. Another idea would be an orange zest. That would be good as well. Or if you don't want a citrus flavor, you can just leave that out. So just a lemon, make sure you wash it first, and then you could use a microplane or a box grater, the fine grate on that. And you just want to get the outer yellow skin, not the white underneath, because it's kind of bitter. And we're only going to use the zest, but keep your lemon because you can use it. Another thing for the juice. Okay, that's good. So I'm just going to take my wire whisk. You could just use a fork, your fingers, mix all that together. Simple enough. Okay, that's our dry. So for our wet, another bowl, I have 2 large eggs. Have your eggs at room temperature. 2 large eggs out of the shell is 100 grams. I'm just going to whisk that to break them up. And then I'm adding ½ cup, 120 milliliters, 120 grams of a flavorless oil. You could use like a corn, vegetable, canola, safflower. I like to use oil. If you use oil in a cake, it makes it really nice and soft and moist. Plus, if you want to store it in the refrigerator, it doesn't get hard like butter would. But if you would prefer to use butter, you could use ½ cup, 113 grams of melted butter. So, your choice. And I'm going to add 2 tablespoons, which is 30 grams of, I'm using an unsulfured molasses. You know, gingerbread typically has molasses. You know, some people say where they live, they can't find molasses. Just use honey. That would be just as good. I mean, a little different flavor, but still really good. And whisk that in. And the molasses, of course, that dark color, along with the cinnamon, is what gives our cake that beautiful golden brown color, or honey color, I guess you'd call it. And now I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup, which is 180 milliliters, 180 grams of, I'm using a plain yogurt. I'm using actually a plain Greek style yogurt. You could use the full fat. Of course, you get a richer flavor. You could use also a reduced fat. I wouldn't use the fat-free. You need some fat and make the cake taste good. So if you're using a reduced fat, you might want to drain off if there's any excess liquid there, water, just drain that off before you add it. Let's whisk that in. Yogurt, I mean, it really makes a wonderfully moist cake. You got the oil that helps, and then the yogurt. And I like the flavor. Just, if you've been on the site lately, I've made a lot of yogurt cakes. So you might want to go to our YouTube channel or joybaking.com and check out all the different yogurt cakes. I like how easy they are and how good they taste. And lastly, I'm adding 2/3 of a cup, which is 135 grams of granulated white sugar. I'm using an organic cane sugar. That's why it's not white. It's kind of off-white. And whisk that in. I didn't add any vanilla extract. I mean, if you wanted to add that, you could add a teaspoon. But you know, you have a lot of other flavors here, so I don't find I need it. Okay, so now I'm just going to make a bit of a well here in the center and wet to the dry and mix them together and we're done our cake. Except for our apples, we gotta do that. And I'm just using my spatula. You could use your whisk. Mix them together. Want to make sure all that flour is moistened. You know, I'm topping the cake with slices of apple, but, you know, pears would also be very good. This, you know, it's such a rustic looking dessert with the apples. I just think it's just, I mean, you can make it any time of the year, but I think it's just perfect for the fall and winter. Okay, that looks good. So, just dump it in here. And also, I mean, if you didn't want to top it with apples, you could just bake it off like this. That's another idea. If you're in a rush, which we sometimes are. And then you can use an offset spatula, back of a spoon, just smooth it out. Okay, I'm just going to clean up a bit here. I'll be right back and we'll do our apples. So now for our apples, you will need about 2 apples, medium, large size, and then peel them. And then I'm just going to half it and then cut down on either side of the core, like so, and then across. Take the seed out. And then just thinly slice your apples. I always like to have, like, if I say 2, you know, I find it better to buy at least 3 because you never know if there's some bruising. A lot of times you don't know until you cut into your apple. So I find it's better to be on the safe side. if you want to slice your apples before you make your cake batter, then I would just squeeze a little bit, because you have that lemon left over. You could just squeeze a little of that lemon juice over the top of the apples, toss them, and that'll help prevent them from browning. But we're doing it the other way. So now, you have your cake, and then I'm just going to do overlapping slices of apple all the way around. Okay, so for the last one, you just got to kind of lift the slices and just fit those in. So there we have it. And then for the center, I mean, you can kind of do it however you want. I always, how do I do that? I'm just going to do slices right down the center, like so, and then just put one, yeah. Just fit that. There. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just take just a half a tablespoon, about 7 grams of granulated white sugar, and just over the apples. You might, like my apples, you want a firm textured apple for this so it doesn't, you know, when it bakes it doesn't go mushy. But, you know, like a Granny Smith, you could, I'm using a Gala, which is not like really tart, it's kind of sweet tart. So I'm only adding about a half a tablespoon of sugar. If you were using like a Granny Smith, which it can be quite tart, then you might want to add a little more sugar to that. Keep your apples, nice little snack for the cook. So now, to bake. Some people say that their springform pan tends to leak. If that is the case, then just put your springform pan on a larger baking sheet, just to make sure it doesn't, you don't want to mess up your oven floor. So, baking time. You know, everyone's oven can be a little different, so I'm going to say between 35 and 45 minutes. Or, I mean, it will rise, your apples will get, you want them to be nice and tender. And if you put a toothpick into the center, it will come out clean. So 35 to 45. I do like to, about halfway through baking, is to rotate my pan front to back for even bake. So our apple gingerbread cake is done. It looks gorgeous. So put your pan on a wire rack. So now, if you, I mean, you don't have to do the next steps that I'm going to do, because if you notice, the cake that just came out of the oven and the one here look a little different, because what we're going to do, we're going to dress it up, kind of make it look more like what you would get in a bakery. We're going to put our cake under the broiler of our oven so that it will brown the tips of our slices of apple. So what you will need to do is to turn on the broiler setting to high in your oven. The broiler, if you're not familiar with that term, is the top element. You don't want the bottom element on, just the top element. So that's what I'm going to do. Put your rack, I'd put mine about, you know, the second rung down, just enough so that, you know, you have some room there from the element to your cake. And soon as that turns, your element turns red, then we will be able to put our cake under there. But first, I'm going to turn on my broiler. So now we are ready. So what I'm going to do, just to make it easier, because my pan's hot, I'm going to put it on a baking sheet. Now I'm going to put it in the oven under the broiler. Now you got to watch it very carefully. You don't want to burn the top of our cake. We just want our apples and even a bit of the cake will turn a golden brown. I do rotate my pan as it's broiling just to make sure I get a nice even. See, you can see that I got a little bit of room there from the broiler to the top of the pan. Okay, we're done. Turn my broiler off. There we go. Doesn't that look gorgeous? So we are not finished yet. What I like to do is glaze the top of the cake, the apples and that, with an apricot glaze. So what you need to do, I just have a strainer here over a bowl. I've heated, I just put it in the microwave. 1/4 cup, 70 grams of apricot preserves. Just heat it until it starts to bubble, and then I'm going to strain it to get rid of any lumps. Now, we're going to glaze with the apricot for a couple reasons. One, it'll prevent our apples from drying out, which is a big problem if you don't eat the cake right away. Two, it adds some more flavor to our cake, and it also adds a nice pretty shine. So that's why I do it. If you ever go to a bakery and you see that with, you know, typically with fruit tarts or, I've got a plate, so I'm just going to put this right over here. Excuse me for that. And then what I'm going to do is just thin that out. You could add 1/2 tablespoon just of water. I'm going to use Grand Marnier. You could use a brandy, some rum, whiskey, but water's fine. The kids, you don't want the alcohol. So now, with the pastry brush, oh, I can smell that Grand Marnier. Just, what I'm going to do is paint or brush all my apple slices. Plus, I'm also going to brush the top of the cake. It's going to give it that beautiful shine. See the difference? I mean, it really does make a difference. I think it just makes everything kind of pop. Okay, make sure you get all that. And then, so you could just leave it just like that, or couldn't resist. I've got some chopped pecans. You could use walnuts, almonds, hazelnuts, or you don't even have to do it. I think people are going to say, where did you buy it? That's what I'll do is usually I wait a little, but I'll just unsnap this so you can really get a look at the cake. Look at that. I just think that's gorgeous. It's very like rustic looking. That's why I say it's just perfect for the fall and the winter. So now it's a little warm. I'm going to let that cool down, and then when we come back, we will try a slice. So our cake is cooled down to room temperature. So let's cut a slice. Oh, doesn't that look wonderful? So there we have it, our apple gingerbread cake. It's really good with a little dollop of whipped cream or vanilla ice cream. Just takes it up that extra notch. So let's try some. I'm just going to try the cake. I won't have the whipped cream. Oh. You got a lot of flavor. You have the cake. It is so moist, and then, you know, it's nice. It's got a, I think it's perfectly spiced, at least for my taste. And then you have the apples, which add another layer of flavor. And then, I mean, like I said, you don't have to finish it off with the broiling of the apples and then the apricot glaze and the nuts. But I mean, just look at it. It just takes it up. It just makes it such a pretty cake. Plus that apricot glaze, like I said, it adds even more flavor. You have it so the apples don't dry out, and then the shine. And then a little crunch of the nuts. I like that too. So like I said, have it with a little whipped cream. You could serve this warm at room temperature or even cold. I do, because it has the yogurt in it, I do store it in the fridge, so I'll eat it cold. You could freeze it. You know, it's a really pretty cake. It's flavorful. You have to try it. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.